Welcome back to Autism Live. We are here in the studio live with August McAdoo. I was going to say something else, but I got it right. And Jeremy Aldrich. And if you missed before, I was saying that they are here to talk about a very special production of Boys Next Door. And it's being produced by CRE Outreach.
Yes.
Opening on October 12th. Tell us again where we can get the tickets, Jeremy.
Okay, you can go to www.creoutreach.org. There's a big button. You can press it. It says buy tickets, and you'll be able to do it.
And it will be a fabulous thing. The tickets are only $15.
Yep, $15.
Which is an amazing opportunity to go to the theater. It's a great play to begin with. I think a play that's important to our society because it is about people of different abilities. This is the first production that we are aware of in which people of different abilities have been cast to play the roles, not necessarily the different ability of the person in the role, which I love. And August is in the show, starring in the show, one of my favorite roles in the show, the very lovable Norman, who absolutely adores donuts.
Yes.
I can't wait to see you in this, August.
I can't wait to start. I can't wait to get rolling.
Absolutely. To get an audience, right?
Yes, because rehearsals are absolutely fun. They're discovery filled. But once those lights go down and people get into the theater and they see what we do and what we can do, it's one of a kind.
I love the passion. And Jeremy, you're directing.
Yeah, and I just say it's. I was thinking about this last night. Just the courage of these actors is unbelievable. I mean, it's unbelievable. I did one other production called Beyond Sight that we did an original musical I did with CRE, and we had a moment in that show where the lead in the second act, he was a blind actor. He ran across the stage, to his therapist, I think, if that's right. It was a magical moment, right? Because he just went freely.
He ran with abandon.
He ran with some abandon, and it was a pretty amazing moment. But what's crazy is that in this show, we have those kind of moments happening all the time from the time we go up to the time we go down.
Wow.
It's just, and I was just thinking about, not only physically but emotionally, it's a very challenging piece.
Yes.
Especially for certain actors and actually really all of the boys, it's very emotionally challenging. So it's an adventure that way, as well as physically. And I have a lot of admiration for them and what they're doing. So they're stepping forward. It's outstanding. It's crazy, really. So
well, what a lovely
come
thing.
See. Yeah.
Yes, I cannot wait to see it. But I also want to say too that kind of the permission to be that courageous. It all trickles down, and if you've created a space in which they feel that they can do that, you need to take ownership of the fact that you created that space in which for them to do it. So congratulations to all of you.
Thank you.
I mentioned before the break that I wanted to talk a little bit about something because you directed a play a couple of years ago. It was an original work called Absolutely Filthy.
That's right.
And it was, I talked about it on the show. I came in and talked about it because it was it was amazing show. Won all kinds of awards, had many more incarnations because it was so lovely. I still think that things need to happen with that show because it was amazing.
There's still things going.
I really, truly, if you get an opportunity to see it, you will not be sorry. And I was there for a particular performance where something happened. There was a member of the audience that, as the show started, there are some very poignant things in the show, but some very funny things in the show. And the show started, and everybody was laughing and enjoying it. And one person was laughing particularly loudly. And then the laughter continued. And the loud, over-the-top laughter was all the time. And sometimes in very inappropriate moments and very loud. And in a small theater, there was no way to get away from it. And it even took me, with all the experience that I now have, it took me a while to realize, that is not a choice. That is what that person came to this theater with. This is their way of accessing theater, and it is disruptive. It was disruptive. It was disrupting other people's experience of watching the show. I could feel the audience getting frustrated. There were times when people made comments, but through all of it, the actors on the stage, really hunkered down and continued on, and there was an energy that happened as a result. And your leading actor,
Brendan Hunt,
so talented,
extremely,
and so talented in this role. And you want to talk about courage and leaving it all on the stage, man. Like, there's literally and figuratively, he does. There is no place for him to hide. And he powered through it when I think a lot of actors would have been thrown off. Mm-hmm. And the level of focus of what happened, it was, for me, life-changing to see this happen in this moment, partially because of seeing how the audience reacted, because you could feel that there was this, I am entitled to watch this show without your getting in my way. Mm-hmm. And they were angry.
Wow.
They were angry about it. And it was so interesting because it was mirroring exactly what the show is about on stage. Mm-hmm. About one person saying, I can't do it your way. I can't. I've tried and I cannot do it your way. That does not make me any less than you. And the fact that there was this happening on stage and this happening in the audience, to me, was very personal and emotional and devastating in so many ways that it's how many years later, and I still have a reaction to it. And then later I got to have a conversation in your home with you and your leading actor and several other people about that night. Because in the interim, one of the things that happened was there was a production of South Pacific where a mom had taken her child who was on the spectrum to see the show. And there was a moment where somebody, I think, was being flogged, and the child had a severe reaction, had watched an hour and a half of the show, but had this reaction to it and began to scream. And people in the audience began saying to the mother, you've got to take him out. And she was trying, and he was holding on to the railings, did not want to go. And it really was very disruptive to the audience and to the show. She did get him outside, and people were saying, why on earth would you take someone like that to the theater? And to me, this is crushing, right? And what I loved more than anything else was that the actor, the lead actor, published something and said, I want to respond to this. That of course she should have brought him to the theater. And of course he had a reaction. And of course that made it uncomfortable for people. And that is why we do live theater.
Wow.
And I loved hearing that from the actor, but there will always be people who will say, if you can't hang the way I can, you can't come.
Hang at all.
You can't come to the arts, which I appreciate how difficult it is to watch. I was in that audience and I was struggling to be able to access the play while this person it was a struggle. But that is me having to struggle one day. That young man struggled every day. And I don't feel more entitled to see theater than he does. But it was clear that a lot of people in the audience did not feel that way. And I know what I loved when we had the conversation at your house, you said, and JJ, who had produced the play, was there, and the two of you, both who had been my students, I couldn't have been more proud of you on that day than ever. You said to me, what can we do when this happens again? Instead of saying, how do we prevent somebody from coming to the theater, you said, how can we give them access and not make it harder for everybody else? What can we do?
Yeah, how can we make it a win for everyone? How can we make it accessible?
And I loved that your heads were in that space instead of saying, like the people at South Pacific said, which is, you shouldn't take those people to the theater. Can you imagine if you had not been allowed to go to the theater?
No, that's...
The world would be a less wonderful place.
Seriously.
If you had not been allowed to go to the theater.
Seriously.
So that you could now perform and do a performance that I know is going to be amazing for people. I get emotional about it. But as a director,
I'm just baffled by thinking about that. Like,
right?
Wow.
And yet, you know, this is where a lot of the world comes from a place of, if you can't hang the way I can, you can't come. As a director, and a director who's working in this format, and then working in theaters where this is not the format, where are you with this now?
As far as access?
And thinking about that now, because you weren't there that night.
No.
Your wife was there.
Yeah.
And I'm sure she came home and said things about it. And then I called you up and I was like, yeah, I had a whole different take on it. But so you didn't get to be there and experience it, but you've heard it from a lot of us with different points of view.
Sure.
So, and anyway, your thoughts?
Well, I know that, well, interestingly, like, I think there's like a coda to that story, because people in the theater community that know that gentleman, they actually worked together and worked very hard, I think, and actually were able to improve the situation or improve the individual's reactions.
So he's been able to
work, but like for the community to stand up and say, how can we help? How can we just have some effect? So that was something that happened, which I believe was a wonderful, was a wonderful thing. So that's kind of the ending on that. I think that was a very,
and I didn't know that, so that's wonderful. It ended up
being a very successful
so he's still
process.
coming back to the theater and enjoying the theater in a way that isn't being disruptive to other people.
I believe so.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, so
wonderful.
that was a, so there wasn't a, some kind of punishment or exclusion reaction. It was more how can we work in a way that is going to benefit everyone,
yeah, and
not exclude anyone.
Yeah.
So, I think that's a great ending to that story.
I love that.
I think, I read that essay that you talked about, and I think it was about the
actor.
The actor with the child, and that's just it. I mean, how can you know? Like, how can you know how something is exactly going to impact your child or impact someone you don't know?
Yeah.
And so many of us have so many different reactions and histories and so on. How could you possibly exclude people?
Well, and the fact for me that young man in the South Pacific had already seen like an hour and some odd of the show and not been disruptive was very telling to me. Obviously, when we take kids to the theater, when we take little kids to the theater, there's a thing, and I think people should take little kids to the theater all the time, right? And whenever I had the opportunity to, I took my son to the theater. In fact, you did children's theater, and I would bring my son. Yeah. It was one where you served pancakes.
Yes, yeah.
It was, at a show. But I have a pancake memory. But kids aren't going to be the well-behaved audience members either, and there is an understanding amongst parents that there's a certain level of disruption in which your child, just like at church or any other public place, if your child is acting out to us or making a certain amount of noise, that there's a judgment call at which point you step out. Yeah. And that mom was trying to take her child out of the theater. The child did not want to go, Can
I ask you a question?
Yeah.
How do you feel about separate showings? How do you feel about separate showings? How do you feel about, because there's multiple ways you could solve the issue. Well, like when we're at church, let's say, they have a room, for the little ones, so you can have watch the show.
Yes, yes.
And, if there's something that's going to be happening, like you're in that spot.
Yeah.
What do you feel that those types of accommodations, let's say, are insulting or somehow, does that make it a less than situation? or like how do you feel about those types of solutions
Not at
to
all.
bringing people to the arts?
Not at all. And then I want to know your opinion about this. But
Okay.
I feel like if you give people choices, people will often be able to choose what is right for them. And for some people, there is a sensory issue that if it's too loud, they still want to access to it, but being able to be in a room where they can either have their reaction or have the sensory deadened a little bit.
Yeah.
I love to go to sensory friendly performances.
Blue Men Group. Blue Men, I'm coming for you guys.
Are you about to go see a sensory friendly
I-
production?
I went to one actually. It was last year. It was no, it wasn't. It was 2016. It was for my first performance, and somehow, some way, I guess production crew, they knew that there were a lot of children and adults with autism that had a sensory issue, and me being one of them, and I said, okay, I'm gonna go. I'm gonna have fun,
Yeah.
and in the middle of it, there was this moment where the Blue Men, they came out to the audience, and of course, they touched me on my nose, they touched me on my hand, put blue paint on me, and they looked me, I looked one of them in the eye, and I was like, this is fun, thank you. It was nice. It was one of the nicest experiences I've ever had.
And amazing to have that opportunity. I recently went to, and it wasn't the first time I've been in a sensory friendly production, but where lights are up instead of down, and nobody was allowed to clap, and everybody was clapping the sign language for it, because sensory wise there were people who it's too much when people clap, and it was such a different experience of the show.
Sounds fascinating.
Right, and getting to talk to the actors afterwards about how was that different for you. And in the beginning, there were some of us, myself included, it was like, scene ends and I'm like, oh, and I had to think and become mindful. But there was such joy in being able to physicalize how I felt about what they were doing on the stage that I kind of preferred it. And I find myself doing this all the time now, because it was, by the end of the show, we were in the habit. And this, I have arthritis. This is painful.
Yeah.
And this feels joyous to me. So I thoroughly enjoyed it. I think when you give people choices, they will gravitate. I mean, right now, you can take your child to go see a movie and have it be in the dark theater, or you can go and see a sensory-friendly version of it where they'll have the lights up and where everybody knows that there'll be conversations and things are going to happen. For some people, that's more distracting, where you can choose to go see it in the dark and have that mystic chasm thing happening for you.
Yeah.
I love that you can choose to go to a museum and have the lights at brighter or less at different times because they have it sensory friendly. I think we're getting there, and I don't think that saying we have different accommodations unless you force it. If you say you must see this performance, you must sit in this room, that's the only thing that I think would feel in any way
discriminatory.
Yeah.
Well, that's a great answer. Thank you.
A long one.
Because just when you're thinking about these issues, you don't even know if your thoughts are discriminatory. If you're like,
Look,
if I'm saying, well, these are some options, but you don't. Yeah. Anyway, so I appreciate you. I appreciate that distinction about choice. That really straightens out some things. Would have been a good thing to know when we were having some conversations years ago about this similar issue.
I'm available whenever you want to talk.
I know.
But I want to say that I am a parent.
Yeah.
I am, and I count myself as part of the autism community as a parent. For a lot of time, I was my son's proxy before he could communicate. Now he communicates on his own. I am no longer his proxy. I am a cheerleader. I am on the side. I am not a part of. And it's very big in the autism community to say nothing about us without us. And I am not that anymore. I was his proxy. I am not anymore. The true opinion is people like yourself to know, and I spend a great deal of time with adults on the spectrum and finding where I am small-minded and I am wrong and I am not seeing the big picture. And that's where I always have to come from, that place of I don't know. But I am always at the table to learn. So I can't wait to come and learn from your performance. We're totally out of time.
It's gonna be a lot of fun.
But again, where are we sending people to, gentlemen?
Okay, so we're going to www.creoutreach.org to buy tickets. And again, we open October 12th. So come see it soon so you can tell your friends how awesome it was.
There you
and
go.
They can come too.
And here's a bonus.
Yeah.
If you use the code word BOYS, you get $5 off. Am I right?
That's true.
Jeremy was keeping that close to the vest.
He
wasn't
was,
letting
but there
people
you
know
go.
that.
Now it's
But
out.
it's
Now
out of the bag. And I will be going. I cannot wait to see this, and I hope to bring my child to see this because I think he will enjoy it.
Anyway,
We'll talk later. We'll talk later. But in any case, and also if you're not in the Los Angeles area and you're watching and you're like, oh, this sounds so great. You can still talk it up on your social media, and they take donations.